Welcome to the Happy Pear podcast, where our ultimate goal is to inspire, educate, and awaken your curiosity, and overall to help you to become healthier and happier.
We're Dave and Steve, identical twins who started a veg shop nearly 20 years ago. Since then, it's expanded into a social following of over 1.5 million people, nearly 50 million views of our videos, nearly 500,000 books sold, cafes, farms, apps, courses, food products to help you to eat more veg.
We speak to thought leaders, health experts, trailblazers, and specialists of all kinds, from the ones you know to those you've never ever heard of. This week's podcast is sponsored by Vivo Barefoot shoes. We've been wearing them for 6 years, and genuinely, they are our favorite shoes, and that is all we wear beyond being barefoot.
Yeah, they're really, really great. They've tons of different varieties. You get 15% off with the code HAPPYPEAR15.
And if you don't like them, what do you do, Dave?
You can send them back within 100 days. So if you're interested, vivobarefoot.com, and the code is HAPPYPEAR15. I guess we got to start with Hometree, Matt.
First of all, thanks for coming.
Yeah,
wonderful to have you here.
Yeah, really is.
Love your work, and you're a beautiful human, and honoured to have you here.
Love it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And even when I think of the word Hometree, I immediately think of Avatar.
Yeah.
Like I really do. We're such suckers. Like that was one of our favorite movies. And I think of Hometree as the place where the Na'vi people, you know, it was the center of their home.
Yes.
And,
It was their heart.
So
it was the heart of their community.
yeah.
But in Ireland, Moncton was telling us that back possibly thousands of years ago, let's say back in the past in Ireland, each town used to have a big oak tree, and that was the symbol of the town, and that's where they'd gather around. And if one town wanted to take over another town, they'd cut down the oak tree, and that was the worst thing you could do.
Yeah.
So it was like a home tree in a sense. So I think the word for your mission and what you're doing and your charity has so many different meanings.
Sweet. It's been a mad ride, and one that I've been grateful to be on. And think that right now we're doing a great job and delivering a lot of impact for the people that support our work, like yourselves. So I think that's when I first met you, as random phone call. I remember being in my little cabin, and I can't remember who, but like, we're doing Ireland's Fittest Family. We got to nominate a charity. Can it be ye? And that was, I think the conversation lasted about 60 seconds. So and that was 10,000 euros. Really, made a big difference at the time. So thanks so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, that was funny. I remember that call, looking on the website going, I hope there's a number. And I called, Matt, how are you?
Yeah. I think it was a Saturday as well. Moncton always tells me off for leaving my personal number on the website. But
in that case,
it works. It works.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place.
Thanks for that.
So nowadays, supposedly Ireland has, like, it's very difficult to calculate. There's approximately less than 1% of the land is covered in woodland.
And it's not just woodland. It's native ancient woodland.
Yeah. So about 12% of Ireland is covered in trees, and about 10% of that is the fast growing tree plantations, which are for timber. And
they're like kind of your pine and your spruce and your
mostly they're just the kind of non-native North American Sitka spruce. So it's really good to differentiate. 12% of Ireland's covered in trees, but 10% of that is a tree farm. Basically, it's just for timber. So that's not the work that I do.
They're kind of monocultures.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's not the work that I do. Then 2% would be covered in native trees, which a lot of them would be planted for timber as well. And then less than 1%, or it's less than a fraction of a percent, is the original ancient woodland, the one with all of the sweet genetic diversity from, thousands of years ago remains. And these are in tiny little pockets, really kind of out of the public eye. Some of them are, in a national park, but most of these tiny little pockets are slithers in ravines that tractors couldn't get to over the years. And, there's a whole array of reasons, why Ireland looked like that and why it looks like that now. And maybe that's kind of what we'll get into now. And ultimately the charity that I work for is built out of that kind of
desire,
kind of tragedy. But, and like, charities exist to kind of serve the public. We're here as a kind of, as well as the state, and we're regulated by the charity regulator. So it's very strict, and we really have to, like, we're purpose-led. We have to be. A charity is the definition of a purpose-led organization. Sometimes I get confused when I see businesses going, hey, we're purpose-led, we're purpose-led, we'll be a charity then, because there's a huge difference. You're generally, when the business says they're purpose-led, they're generally not. They're finance-led, but with a real strong purpose. They're not purpose-led, they're different.
When we first started the Happy Pear, I was adamant to start as a charity because it wasn't about money. And the reason why we started as a business was because we want to try to change society from the inside of capitalism, if you will, as opposed to be from the outside.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I talk about, Hometree is non-political, but we, talk about kind of all of the things that we're addressing, and we speak to a lot of these different threads too, but charities also kind of prop up that capitalist system. We're the kind of where when there's too much money, we're where it goes. So we also just wrapped up in that too, and I suppose not here to break that down. How can you disassemble one without the other? We are a really complex system, and we're looking at like changing big parts of it. So how do you not at least kind of nod that there's complexities everywhere?
Yeah, and so purpose of Hometree is really to plant more native, permanent woodland.
It's about that the key word is permanent, and it's not necessarily about planting, but it's encouraging more permanent woodlands, and it's supporting people do that on their own land. So we're really heavily regulated, and that's our remit with the charity regulator. When we set up in 2014, trustees at the time were myself, Mitch Corbett, Fergal Smith, and Moncon McGann, and we set that up, and we tell the charity regulator in 2014 that we're here to support permanent native woodlands being established on this island. So we can't change that. There's no deviating from that mission. We can kind of look at different strategies to get there, but that is where the money needs to go that we get given.
And is it getting better? Are you is there?
It's been great. The first kind of 6 years, we partnered with Moy Hill. So all of the trees that were, all the money that was donated, we put a lot of trees on that farm. And we really got to kind of hone our knives there, really kind of understand different ecosystems. And then in 2020, we were like, how does Hometree keep going? What's the kind of Hometree 2.0? What does that look like? And it looked, one of the things that the board, myself, Mitch, Moncon, we really looked at was like, let's get the headquarters in a really cool spot. Let's get it close to a town. Let's get it close to some schools. So, we identified our new headquarters just outside Innistimon. It's like a 3 or 4 minute walk from town. You can walk to 6 schools in about 15 minutes. But what we wanted to do there was everything we'd learned partnering with Moy Hill and, in my past life growing vegetables was like, how do we like understand this in a really complex way? And one of it was like, where are we getting our genetic material from? Where are we getting our seeds from, our compost from? So, and we realized that most of the seeds were coming from buying them from one of the big nurseries who kind of commissioned seed collectors all over the country. But most of the time that was, done on quite a commercial way. So we weren't getting this like really rich genetic diversity in our seed collections. So in the last year, these one of the things I want to celebrate is, we have a dedicated seed collector, like Jeremy Turkington. He's out today collecting hazel probably. And not just from 1 or 2 little stands, from like really different parts of the country. So when in our nursery, which is the only organic one in Ireland, in our nursery, we're really producing like the highest quality of sapling and with a lot of genetic diversity. And in that, there's a lot of, biosecurity and, it offers a lot more potential for, I suppose, the expression of trees.
What a cool job. What a cool job to be I'm a seed collector.
Yeah.
Like it's amazing
to go to be one of the luckiest people. He's like got the sweetest job.
In what way? What's his job? Like, what does he end up, like, what's the actual reality?
I'd imagine it's walking around
woodlands. It really is like, I speak, and his job, Sweetly was funded by Life's Too Good guys out of Galway, really, sweet organization. But his job, like, scouting trees, really going like, what's a healthy tree stand look like? A tree stand or tree orchard, is where that we collect our seeds from. Where's a healthy one, and where is particular ones? And an interesting example is like we have a few 30-foot beds, like nursery beds full of wych elm. Like wych elm, they produce
wych elm, like wych elm, a wych.
A wych elm tree is like one of the few native Irish species, and they distribute their seeds one day of the year. Like they drop all of their seeds in one day. And if they're not propagated, it's a huge day. And if they're not propagated, like sown in a prepared seed bed, if they're not sown the same day, they will not germinate. So like his job is to go like, okay, which is the right wych elm and which day is it going to, release its seeds? And then how do I get them into a nursery and propagate them quick? So like the diversity of wych elm, because of that fact alone, is very difficult. Wow. So yeah, he's got a really sweet job and
quite an important job.
But like you couldn't like when anyone's got a sweet job like that, it's like they only got there because they really knew their job and they really passionate about it.
And they put the 20 years in before it.
Exactly. And you know, they know their stuff, but also they're the guys that would be, you know, working past the work hours. You know, he'll be out there whatever time of day he needs to be and he never has a day off. Really, because he's always like, how can you not look at trees when it's your job to look at trees? Like, so he's really learning constantly, and it's great to work with people like that.
Wow. And in terms of like, if we look back at Ireland and probably other countries in the West, like, was there a time when it was like 99% ancient woodland? Like, I'm just trying to get a picture of like where we've come from and where we're at now and where we're trying to go.
The only reference point I have is Robin Hood and Sherwood Forest. You know, when I think back of those Robin Hood movies, it seemed like everywhere was forest.
So good. I suppose before we go on, just in case people don't listen throughout the whole podcast, like a couple of things that I'd love to talk about if I can.
Absolutely.
Like one of the things I have a unique understanding of is the kind of the complexity of nature restoration at scale, or rewilding, or the business of rewilding. You know, I understand that from, you know, kind of corporate perspective all the way through to like seeds. And then, you know, what's underneath that kind of systems processes, how do we interact with, you know, two different groups that are coming from different sides of a problem, and sometimes strategies or, you know, ideas getting kind of lost in that. So how do we remain being people, you know, people, organization? Like obviously planting trees is easy, but how do you change a landscape? That's down to culture, that's down to people. So there's some interesting stuff there. Probably go into talking about surfing quite a bit. You guys have shown a bit of interest. That was my kind of past life, coming from professional surfing, sailing, growing vegetables, and now into trees. But most of the time I've worked outside with people around a purpose. Like that's a theme throughout my life. So.
Well, I was describing you. Well, Matt's an elemental man. Like you're elemental. Like you seemed like to have spent. There's certain chapters of your life. There's like
the water
Matt
chapter.
the sailor, Matt the surfer, and Matt the farmer, and now Matt the woodland man. Like they're very elemental, like basic kind of primal, primitive things. Like
it's you know, and I'm kind of Capricorn sun, Capricorn moon. You know, I'm like a proper doer. You know, that's my mission. Is just like head down, get on with it. But I think, you know, one of the things that has constantly been there for me is like I love being outside. That's really important to me. I love working with purpose. You know, if I don't get something, it doesn't make sense to me, I won't work there. You know, I can't do it with my day. I've had 2 other jobs that are really interesting in my life. One's working for B Corp clothing company in England called Finisterre. And, you know, they've asked me so many times, come work here full time. It just doesn't, you know, float my boat to be doing that on a permanent basis. And then one time I was sailing for a long time and I got offered a job, you know, moving this really beautiful sailing boat around the world, and like better pay than I'll ever get doing any other job. And, you know, it was like 80 grand a year or something. And I only could cut it for 2 years. And I literally took a boat around the world, and it was really beautiful, modern, classic, but it just didn't have enough. It didn't kind of keep the fire lit inside. And all of those jobs have come out of a place of, you know, being really lucky in my life, you know, having a good family behind me. You know, we weren't wealthy family, but all my family supported my decisions thoroughly. So it really has all of those, like this cool life has been really born from a place of privilege. So if I don't kind of keep saying that over and over again, I feel like maybe it'd be unauthentic or something like that. So getting that out there quickly and early, it's really has been through, you know, pure luck. I had a sister that was 2 years older than me, and, you know, imagine what, you know, a real loving sister, imagine what that's like for a 2-year-old boy grown into a sweet family on the beach, that there was this really like maternal person 2 years older than you that loved you to death, and was just constantly going like, if you fall over, I've got you. If you make a mistake, I've got you. If you fall out of that person, I've got you. If you fail at school, I've got you. If you get sacked from that job, I've got you. Like that has just been there constantly.
And you still good mates?
Like so close, love her so much. We're both busy. She's a dairy farmer in England. They run a huge dairy farm. Just, it's interesting that we both ended up working on the land, but yes, they're I think the biggest organic dairy farm in Britain.
Wow.
And, you know, again, we're from like this kind of poor fishing town, and so she ended up, you know, working on this farm. Her husband got 3 kids, and I was back there the other day talking. You guys are going to have to keep me on some kind of track, because I can go everywhere here. But I was back there, and they were talking, you know, just by being an organic farm in Britain, you know, they've got so many rich ecosystems there, and the farm is so big that they have to grow enough fodder for their dairy cows. You know, I think they got 1,000 cows, and it costs about £4 a day to feed each cow. So if they run out of their own food, it costs them $4,000 a day to buy food in. So they're constantly growing food, but they really look after the ecosystem. Dairy farms have got some of the kind of well looked after ecosystems, definitely in Britain and Ireland, because they have to keep their hedgerows up, otherwise the cows escape. On a beef farm, sure, the cows can run anywhere, it doesn't really matter, but they need to manage their grass really well, otherwise it ends up costing them a lot of money. So.
Wow, very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So over to you.
okay. Well, let's go into. Let's do the tree bit first.
Great.
Let's do the tree bit first, and then we've ticked that bit, because I think that's really important just to chat about
like
trees.
Where was Ireland? To go back to that kind of question or kind of comment I said earlier, just about like, was there a point in I'm pretty naive to all this. Like, was there a point when we were 100% or 98%?
Yeah, I don't think we were. I think so I've got a history in forestry and vegetables, and also a degree in natural science. So, and I actually did my homeschool degree when I was living in County Clare surfing. I was just also, my mind was just mad. My mates were heading to the gym to get ready for the big waves, and I'd be just upstairs in this little tiny cold office in the scanner. So
studying homeschooling.
I just kind of did a natural science degree online,
well
in 2007. But Ireland, after the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, when the ice started to melt, Ireland became separated from mainland Europe a lot sooner than, say, Britain did. That makes sense. So we were kind of this icy island on our own, and then mainland Europe and Britain was also this icy mass on its own, but we were separated with the Irish Sea. So we became quite a lonely ecosystem. As the ice melted, there was kind of and the glacial till left this kind of really infertile soil left over, and then kind of juniper, birch, willow seeds, started germinating from underneath as the ice melted. And that's kind of generally what took over Ireland. And it was very bare for a really, really long time. And it was about, I think, 5,000-6,000 years ago that by that point, 80% of Ireland was covered in woodland. It was really, north, south, east, west, squirrel could run all around the place without touching the ground, that kind of thing.
And what were native? What were native trees, if you can imagine?
First would have been kind of juniper, birch, willow, and then
juniper, juniper berries,
gin really beautiful. And there's some really good examples of juniper still up in the barn. They're really an amazing one of the.
They're a rare tree.
They really are. I think they're very bushy. And so we have about 25, 26 native tree species. England has about 150. Europe has about 400. America, 500-600. Amazon, 10,000 or something. So we really have a really small kind of gene pool here in terms of our native woodlands. But at one point, about 5,000-6,000 years ago, the whole country would have been more or less covered with native trees. The West Coast would have been an interesting ecosystem. Very much rainforest, super wet, damp, on every single kind of branch. Really, really, in Clare, we have 2,000 mil of rain. You guys have 600 mil over here. We're completely different ecosystems.
2,000 mil versus 600 mil.
It's they're different places. So, Ireland would have been very rich. And it was a really long time ago that we started, that those trees started being removed. It was, around the time that we discovered how to turn iron ore into iron. It was way before the British came that we started really removing, and I'm Cornish, not British, just so everybody knows. We started removing a lot of our woodlands, and we needed about a hectare, so nearly 2 acres of old oak woodland. We needed a hectare of wood to turn.
Hectare is 3 acres, isn't it?
Hectare is about 2 acres, So we needed a hectare of timber to smelt 1 ton of ore into metal. And that's why we really started cutting down the trees. And at the same time, we started, making more and more complex tools. So we started agriculture on scale. And it was at that time we really started to remove our woodlands. And then, the British were the kind of the last tragic push for our ecosystems, where, they took all of the trees out and, sent them off to the Navy ships. And, during the famine, people used every last bit of woodland to heat and feed their families, to look after themselves. A real tragic story. And, so when the state kind of formed about 100 years ago, they were left with nothing, 1%. I know when the writing was on the wall for, Ireland to become independent, one of the last things that the British landlords did is they liquidated all their assets. They sold the timber, they cut them down, they got rid of it. They were we're going to get kicked out of here real soon. how do we liquidate our assets? And that was one of the things they did.
Wow.
And then after that, when, you know, the Irish landlords came in, again, they were like, how do we build our empire, liquidate any assets we've got on the land? And that's kind of that real sad story. And so when the state kind of took over 100 so years ago, they left with 1% woodland cover, less than 1%. So you can imagine an island, like now there's 12%. You look around, you see these conifer plantations up the mountains, and you're like, okay, at least there's something, you know, you're in the city in Dublin, you look out one of the windows that look out to the Wicklow Mountains and you see a few conifer plantations. Like not so long ago, you wouldn't see a single tree, hardly.
Wow.
So,
and even on a biodiversity point of view, like tree, you know, say for example, native Irish, you know, permanent woodland, it would be a home to thousands of different species, like birds and animals and insects and every gamut of different, you know, species. Whereas these kind of, you know, as you call them, wood farms, which are the non-native kind of, you know, and they're very efficient and very effective, and we need wood, you know, for building things and whatnot, but they're not, you know, homes to a lot of biodiversity.
No, exactly. You know, they're not there to support biodiversity.
Yeah. They're there to grow timber.
They're there to grow timber. And so, you know, when the state formed 100 years ago, they're like, you know, what the hell do we do? What would we do? Our population is shattered. There isn't many like natural resources on our land, and we're a really poor country. And I believe that in the time from then till now, they've done a banging job at getting 10% tree cover. Like we're almost completely sustainable on this island for our own wood, like our own timber production. 150 Arctic lorries of like plain timber are produced a day from this island. 135 of them exported. Like we're killing it. So, you know, sure, they made some pretty big mistakes in looking after biodiversity within that remit, but didn't every business make a complete balls of looking after biodiversity within their remit? Just because they were land workers, why would they have to kind of stump the bill of biodiversity? So I do think that it's really important to separate this kind of angst against non-native timber production.
So even just to bring it back up, like, why are trees beneficial?
Yeah.
Really simple, like why do we need more trees?
Sure, it's in, you know, the oxygen that we breathe, but that's, you know, really basic stuff. I think, you know, half of all of the insects on Earth live in deadwood.
In deadwoods, not even living trees.
Exactly. If we don't have a kind of naturally regenerating, living and dying woodland, insects will not exist. Half of the insects will not exist. It's a really good point, and it's a nice, you know, I'm really excited to be here and feel like humbled to be on the show and to get this airtime. I love that there's a microphone in front of me. Usually I'm just using an imaginary pencil, but so I want to say a lot, and there's so much to talk about, so I'm moving fast. So
well, I think the tree place, like, because how I understand it, like, trees very important for oxygen, very important for insects and for biodiversity, and then
ultimately
really
for soil, because soil is where most, I guess, genetic diversity is ultimately, if you will, or the most amount of microorganisms exist, and I think trees are an intrinsic part of that will hold the soil together, that will feed into that mycelium network.
And even just to build on that, I was just going to say that we started talking about Avatar the movie, and when I think of like Lord of the Rings and Avatar and all these kind of big blockbuster movies, which people like or not like, there's so much symbolism in terms of like nature versus the machine, and the trees, like, nature is always depicted by big forests and trees, and that's good, and that's, you know, that's what typically in the symbolism is the good bit, and then the industrial, the machine, and the, you know,
greed, it symbolizes greed. Is greed and dominance to me
the enemy, you know.
It's often I, you know, do workshops with people, and we're on this mission to protect nature. And what does nature mean? It means something different to each person, you know, and I think that if you don't have a feeling towards woodlands or the nature that I'm working in, it's hard to really kind of get behind it. But get behind the mission or really understand, you know, the problems that we're trying to solve. You've only got to go into a healthy woodland and feel something completely different. It's I think the value is in the good feeling you get from when you're in them. Like that will make most sense, rather than, you know, three lads, talking about the mycelium network. Like that doesn't mean much to so many people. You get it. I kind of get it, and I know it's there conceptually, intellectually. I know it's there, but it doesn't mean that much to me. But if you go into a woodland, that feeling can mean a lot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does.
No,
Because I think of like when you're in the middle of a city, like when we're in London, and you're staying somewhere in a building, and you can feel the pulses. Like there's just a pulse at all hours. Whereas when you go into a woodland, you can just feel your nervous system. You feel your shoulders drop, like everything goes, and you take a deep breath, and you feel
and
like
time almost disappears.
Yeah, time, like you just feel like, oh my God, all that stuff that I thought was really important isn't really. So it fundamentally makes you feel different.
Like I think it's harmony. I think the more we can tune into that more natural rhythm, the more we find ourselves in harmony, and when we're in harmony, there's much more feelings of joy, pleasure, happiness.
And Hometree was really born out of that.
Hometree was born out of that, but Hometree was also born out of like quite a few people really wanting to be active and to support, just to get on with things. That's the energy of Hometree, is like, can we do this? It really is an action-based organization. And, my wife said to me a few days ago, about how when we're in woodlands, that there's something with our nervous system that it's really settling. Like, even though a woodland is a really complex place, like the different colors, the different shapes, the different textures, the different levels, all of these kind of, our eyes are taking in so much, but apparently that gives us relaxation rather than confusion. So I love that supports our kind of inner experience, is this complex outer experience. And you go into the city and there's lots of straight lines, same colors, same shapes, but yet we're more highly strung. And I definitely, I was born on the coast, and I definitely feel my most relaxed when I'm, sat on the beach with rocks in front of me and sand, and then the sea and the different layers of nature. And it's interesting that that's the bit that relaxes me. When you're in a room and you know exactly what's around you, really, in theory, you should be more relaxed. But for me, it's more kind of tension making.
It makes a lot of sense.
Really does. And even just to land Hometree a couple more times. So you've now planted thousands of trees. You've got an orchard where you grow native,
orchard, is that the word?
Nursery.
A nursery, yeah. But we also have like tree stands or orchards where we, have planted really healthy, juicy trees that we then collect seeds from for our nursery. So yeah, the nursery's in great shape. We're growing a lot. So
that's in Ennistimon.
And
people can visit that.
People can visit there, a couple of times a month. We have open days. And we have people reaching out from all over the country saying, we want to set something up similar. And there's loads of people that have been doing this work for a really long time that do have really great, collections of important seeds. And we're just kind of pulling that together and, putting some shape on it. And we've had some good support from some state officials here that they've funded the expansion of our nursery. We've got 4 more tunnels being put up next month. And it's not just us that think this should happen.
Wow, amazing.
But yeah, Hometree, outside of that, since it kind of took its 2.0 version, we went from getting this headquarters, the first bit of land that Hometree as a charity owned itself. And that was 2 years ago, 17 acres in Ennistimon. And now we own about 500 acres. So in 2 years, we've gone from, really being a very small kind of voluntary, its turnover was around 20,000 a year. And in 2.5 years, we've gone from no land, really small kind of, fundraising capacity, no staff. And now we own about 500 acres with a lot more ambition in the next kind of year and a half, have 11 staff. And, I think 2022, our turnover, including kind of different types of funding, was something 650,000. And this year we'll at least, I think, generate a lot more fundraising, donations, putting on workshops, accessing some grants, and we should kind of keep that growth rate going. So and that's a sign of the times, but also the skill of the board and the staff that are working there. So
and so all the money generated, via contributions or via workshops or whatnot, that all goes to planting trees and paying the people to help.
So generally, like our kind of core operations, we have some state funding for. So, the kind of staffing, and then we do quite a few ESG days. So we take kind of teams out and help their businesses connect with each other in nature. So those two things generally fund the kind of core operations. The nursery, it generally looks after itself because it's a primary producer. It creates something out of light and and manpower and healthy soil and water. And then but what helps us access more land is this kind of donations to buying land, or what we call tree pledges. So someone might click online and donate $750, and we'll go and we'll buy a piece of land. We'll get the sapling from the nursery. The land will be converted via planning permission into a permanent woodland, and then that tree, that $750 insured, those few meters to
That's
remain.
€750 or 750?
€7.50 kind of pays for one tree to be put onto a landscape and permanently in a woodland. So that's been really that's critical to our kind of growth and capacity, is that those donations keep coming in. And not here to kind of shout out for funds, but absolutely please give us.
But it was the charity that we got them. We won that competition and got €10,000. It was like, I totally want more trees. Like, it's amazing.
And we want to be smart. It's interesting you said about when you were setting up your business, should we do it as a charity or a kind of limited company? And we have found sometimes people say, like, you can have a bigger impact as a business. People have also tried to steal our staff to go work for them in a kind of more business way, doing something similar. But I do think it's fundamental that the land that belongs to the charity is for the people of Ireland. Like, a charity has to serve the public. That's the number one. Is this serving the public? Yes. So and the land, if Hometree were ever to wind up, that all of our assets would get given to a charity with the similar purpose. So it would go to another charity that really protects and expands woodlands. When a business is wound up, money goes to the shareholders. They're so different, and I think it's like critical.
And so does the public have access to the woodlands? Like
we do a lot of open days, but we need probably about €175,000 a year to pay the insurance to protect the charity from liability. So what our mission is to get enough land to make it worth putting in infrastructure for people to walk around, car parks, trails, insurances. And then once we've got that, and by that point we'll be big enough and turned into a kind of institute that would be able to go to the state and say, hey, we've got something really valuable to you, really valuable to the public, pay for the insurance.
Wow.
Cool. I love that.
So really, like, what we want to do is get big enough for the government to come in and help. But right now there's only a small amount that they can do. One of the most beautiful examples of this, what we're talking about, nature restoration or rewilding at scale, is the founders of North Face and Patagonia was a guy called Doug Tompkins. He was a really forward-thinking man, California in 80s, 70s, 80s. And he came up with Patagonia and North Face. And what's interesting is
came up with both of them.
He came up with both of them, him and Yvon Chouinard, who still runs Patagonia. But he came up with both of them. And after a while, he was like, I've made a ton of money, I'm done. And him and his wife went, they had a bunch of money. They were, affluent enough to go, okay, we're looked after probably for the rest of our lives. Now our mission is rewilding on scale. So they took their money and they went to California, New York, Hollywood, and said, we need millions and millions and millions. And we're going to go to Patagonia in the south of America, Patagonia, Argentina, Chile. And they said, we're going to buy 4 million acres. And they went down there and they did it. And they basically made this area into a reserve. And it was private, so it was private money. And imagine the shit that they got.
4 million.
4 million. Imagine the shit that they got from the local people. And they went in there, but they had a master plan and they stuck to it. And they took the criticism on, and there was death threats, people cruising around with guns. And they said to the landowner, like the people that were working the land there, they said, you can stay. We're going to support you in transitioning from your current farming method into a closer to nature version of farming, but with still really like sticking to your kind of ancestral roots, your cultural heritage within the work that you do. So the different types of farming, and they really supported those people on that journey to transition to a closer to nature farming method at the same time as putting more and more land into nature reserve. So they kind of would minimize, reduce the footprint of that farm system, but maximize the output. So, organic methods, etc. And some of the farmers were like, we're done. How dare you? We want to kill you. But a lot of them stayed by and got the support to transition. Over about 20 or 30 years, they did an amazing job. They reintroduced some keystone species, like, big kind of predators, and with the support of the farming community. And then I think in 2005, the Doug and Tompkins Foundation, they gave all of the land to Chile and Argentina. And now it's a national park that's owned by both countries. And it's like the biggest success story ever. So I think,
and yet it's something I've never heard of.
There's capitalism, it's an amazing that like what is perceived as the enemy created, someone with great vision was able to really.
It's really amazing, and what I really like about that story is, how much they were forward thinking, and they took the communities that they were ultimately impacting along that journey with them, and that's critical. And that's, rewilding at scale. And what I want to say is...
It's also so interesting, sorry to cut you off there, is that when you look at something over 30 years, it makes so much sense. But probably year 1, 2, 3, like they were lunatics, they were crazy, they were and then it's only look back now at 30 years and you go, that was amazing. And I'm sure the amount of mountains they had to climb to.
Oh, yeah. And, like fearlessly and what's important to me is like we have this blueprint of how to do it well. We've had it for a really long time. And so... let's just kind of keep rolling that out. And that's really one of the things that we're doing is like, we buy a small piece of land or as big a piece as we can afford or finance. And from that, we really try and work with our neighbors as much as possible to kind of support them into adding tree systems onto their land, to support them accessing, different kind of closer to nature state funding methods. So, last year, like when you get a piece of grass, when you get a field, if you want to turn it into a woodland, you have to putting planning permission to the state and say, I want to turn this land into woodland.
Wow.
That's a requirement, right? Of course, it makes sense. If you've got a field and you want to change its use, you have to do it.
To change a use to a woodland. That's amazing that you've, because like, I can understand it when you take over a building in the middle of a town and it was a bookshop and you want to turn it into a restaurant. You apply for planning because you need electricity, you need sewage, or you need kitchens,
I would have
or whatever.
Agricultural land is agricultural land, and a forest is.
So you can kind of let
it
it go wild, but it can remain agricultural. But then you can kind of cut it back and you can turn it back into grassland. But if you turn it into a forest, and then if you access some state kind of funding methods to pay for the woodland, but when you turn it into woodland, you have to go through that process. This is just of our work. Like last year, we put in 4 applications on our own land, so 4 different pockets, one of 20 acres, one of 10 acres, one of 2.5 acres, maybe just 3 last year. But we put in 15 of those applications on behalf of our neighbors. So they'd be accessing pretty good finance from the state, and they'd get all of our kind of impartial, skills to help them do that process. So that's just like, we will never do this work. There's 20 million acres of land in Ireland. We own 500. We'll never really like achieve like a world that we want to see without really like thoroughly engaging with all of the different people that are affecting the different communities. It's critical that's done well. And the state have been trying to do versions of that for a really long time. No one doesn't care. Everybody cares. We just get stuck on strategy.
Time to pay the bills now. As we said, this podcast is sponsored by Vivo Barefoot Shoes. They're the only shoes we've been wearing for 6 years. And really, we wouldn't take someone as a sponsor unless we really believe in them. And this is a company, and these are shoes that we've seen it in ourselves. Our feet have become more natural. They're stronger.
They're wider. I can isolate. There's this kind of movement called toga, which sounds funny and sounds stupid, but it's where you can isolate your toes and move them kind of individually. And through wearing shoes, at least there's even research from Vivo at universities that your feet muscles will typically improve by 60% within a number of weeks of just wearing barefoot
within
shoes.
100 days, I think it is. So, and even think about it logically, that in a house, the foundation or the base of the house is the most important bit which the structure sits on. And the same way we just wear shoes without thinking about it, yet our feet are the foundation. And when you've got them in shoes that actually encourage the natural kind of movements within your feet, it enhances every aspect of your anatomy.
Yeah. So if anyone does want to try them out, Vivo Barefoot are offering a 15% off with the code HappyPear15
for all the family, from formal to casual to kids, and everything in between. So 15% off, HappyPear15. Well, and how does it work? So say you get a field, you apply for planning permission, and now you're allowed to turn it into forestry. Mm-hmm. Do you like kind of go, okay, well, we've got to put some witch hazel, we've got to put some oaks, we've got to put some ash, and let's just plant them every...
Juniper. I like the sound of juniper.
Plant them every so far and then come back and...
No, so there's, firstly, even before we purchase a piece of land, an ecologist will kind of take a walk through and see what's there, see if it's even a piece of land that wants to be put into woodland, and then if it can be, if the land would want to go to woodland, and then legally if it can be, is different. There's like, you can't really put a forest on the middle of a road or next to a road. You can't put a forest under electricity pylon. You can't put one next to someone's house. Like, they all make sense, right? So first you see if the land wants to, and then if it's possible with the state to convert it. So that's what we'll do.
When you said there, when the land wants to,
well, like,
so what does that mean?
That's such, thanks for the shoe in.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to talk more? Because I'm really letting rip.
Yeah, no, it's
great.
Like the land wanting to is interesting, because like how I understand it is, and the more I understand more about nature, the more I become less ignorant about it.
Even it was like Mary Reynolds would talk about, like, listening to the land speak and allow Mother Nature to dress herself. And is it that kind of, when you talk about listening to the land and allowing it to become what it wants to be, as opposed to being more a guardian of the land as opposed to a gardener of the land?
Yeah, that was, you're riffing off that.
It's so funny. These guys are like putting their hands up when they want to speak. It's so good.
Well, it's more just to because I know you're a great talker. It's kind of like, it almost feels like nature left, outside of human hands will ultimately likely come back to forests in most cases, unless it's a mountain or unless it's really high altitude. But in a lot of cases, it seems like the inevitability if humans disappeared was there'd be great forests in a short period of time, which is a few generations, a few lifetimes.
It's exactly, what nature wants to do by design is become more complex. It's intrinsically in all of the natural systems is, let me become more complicated, let me become richer in expression, in diversity. And so if you have, say, a grassy field, for instance, like on a conventional farm here, and in most of the similar latitude, like there'll be about 12 different grass species on that farm, and if you leave it for quite a long time, nature alone, like properly left alone, without kind of regular herbivore pressure or something, if it's left alone, it will naturally add species will come in, that they'll become, rushes will come in, or brambles or bracken, then they'll fall over and they'll leave a little bit of a bare earth, and then a birch or willow seed will fly through the wind. 2 billion willow seeds per year per willow plant will fly through the air, and it will land on one of these kind of bits of grass that has had some mulch on it by accident, and it will propagate in that place. Then a birch and a willow tree will come in, after, if it's in a wet place, maybe alder. And over the years, more and more diversity will be on this one grassy field. Imagine, not only are we seeing the 12 grasses, we've also got some brambles, some brackens, some rushes, then we've got some trees as well. And eventually the pioneer species that I'm talking about, birch, willow, alder, they will generally take over this field, and then it will be like a little bit more complex. And after a while, an acorn or a hazel will land there, being moved by a bird or an animal or something, and then that will come up too. And over many, many years, naturally, an island, the oak woodland would probably become more dominant, because it can grow in the understory of these birch and willow woodlands. An oak sapling can grow like in hiding very little light, but I'm going to get back to something in a minute, but it can grow in very little light. So eventually the oak woodland will come back over, and when that's there, different types of trees can grow in the understory of that, like holly, and then we've got a really like multi-level woodland with different grasses on the border, and then at that point really interesting animals can come
there's a lot more.
So nature wants to become more complicated. An oak tree, for instance, can support 450 different insects.
Wow.
A willow about 80, alder 80. And what's interesting there is like a spruce tree, I don't want to keep going there, but can support about 23, an oak tree 450. So we've got this really complicated woodland, and it's not just the kind of herb layer at the bottom, which is where most of the diversity lives, but it's all the way up. So then we have the herb layer, the middle layer, like the willow trees, and then the holly, and then at the top we've got the canopy where different animals live in as well. And if that area, we call that the core area, if that's left to be bigger and bigger, then different mammals can live in a bigger area of that space. So it's really important that we have a big core area that's connected to other big core areas via corridors, and those corridors can kind of go around the outside of agricultural systems farmland. Like we all need to eat, so it's critical that we have both of them running at the same time.
Wow, it's amazing. It makes me think of, you mentioned keystone species like down in Argentina, and it makes me think in Ireland when like a friend has land up the hills, and he plants a lot of oak trees, but he has to cover them. He has to cover them in plastic little tubes because otherwise the deer come and eat them. And like
he talks about the proliferation of the deer since the wolf has gone. And the deer, because there is no keystone species to help regulate the amount of deer. He said deer are just everywhere.
They just love they love young saplings because that's their natural food. And I just wondered, what are your experience with deer or animals like deer? Well, it's predominantly a deer
and the lack of a wolf being around.
The lack of a predator. How does that happen? Or the lack of a keystone species? Because in Ireland, the keystone species, I would imagine, is a wolf.
Well, it's interesting now, and kind of going back to the point that I was making before, is like up till this point of the conversation, everybody's in. Right, we're all in. We're just like, of course, I want more woodlands.
Woodland, yes.
100% of the population are yes. 100%. I agree with maybe some of the slight things.
Now we're getting into a bit of
now we're getting into a strategy. We're talking about how does someone else not do what they're doing so I can do what I'm doing.
As in, to introduce a wolf, meaning it's going to get in the way of cattle or
exactly.
sheep.
It's like our work is now going to, if we talk about kind of removing herbivore pressure, sheep, goats, deer, that's going to start interfering with someone else's thing, and that's where it becomes really nuanced, and that's when we start the difference of that group doing tree planting and that group doing tree planting. Like now it starts to get really good. Like Doug and Linda in Argentina, they did it really well. They did piss a few people off, but generally they took everybody on the ride. 4 million.
No, that's probably 30. That's it.
Looking back
from 30 years. So
exactly,
Hometree's only going 9 years, and you're getting more and more into it, but. Most things, if you look back over 30 years, you're only going to see the big peaks and the bottoms, the valleys.
And that it succeeded.
Yeah. And
they got a gold medal. Congratulations. Wow. Whereas on a daily, weekly, yearly basis, there's all these little kind of challenges.
So talking about that herbivore pressure.
And herbivore pressure means like the deer eating it, or
basically,
the cattle.
Here in the
deer's really
and even to create a context for anyone listening, like even you look at Yellowstone Park with the reintroduction of the wolf, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was the wolf in there literally changed how the river came and introduced massively affected the biodiversity and the complexity of that ecosystem. And in the context here, with a possible reintroduction of...
This is a curveball of a conversation.
But
so
it's like something we talk about every day. Like our biggest site in Galway is 300 acres, 280. To get a really good deer-proof fence there is going to be about €1 million.
A million
deer-proof fence
for our relatively small farm in County Galway.
And because deer will come in and eat the sapling.
Deer and kind of rogue sheep will come in and eat anything. Sheep are kind of hierarchical grazers, so they'll like literally sniff out a birch tree or a willow before they'll even go for grass. Like they were like on that
that's
site.
Like the sweet shop. That's
exactly on our site. I think there's about maybe 10 tiny little willow trees, like as small as my knee, just because sheep, they just love it. And sheep aren't native to Ireland. Sheep are kind of Asian herbivore. Like our ecosystem here hasn't co-evolved since the ice age to deal with herbivore pressure like that. So it is.
Sheep are from Asia. Geez, like whatever, being a naive 4-year-old, you think, oh, sheep must be indigenous to Ireland. Should be more sheep than humans.
And what's interesting is, at some point, I think about 400 years ago, when the West was very poor, but the kind of landlords in the East, they didn't mind so much about it because they were like, Jesus, there's nothing over there that is worth any value, until we found this sheep that could remain in the highlands, remain up in the mountains all year round. And when that happened, they'd come down fat in the spring and we'd be able to kind of harvest them and sell them. And it was at that point that we really kind of destroyed any healthy ecosystems left when the herbivores could stay out the whole time. So it is important, if we want to do anything on scale, we need to look at kind of removing herbivore pressures from some of our national
because
parks
or designated trees.
They'll just eat everything. And then what happens if there's already a woodland there, like most of our national parks, they're already woodlands that don't have the herbivore pressure looked after. We end up with these geriatric woodlands where there's just very old trees there and they haven't got this.
There's nothing new coming in.
Nothing new's coming in.
Because the sheep have eaten them all.
And what I was saying before is, I said
geriatric woodlands.
Yeah, I'd say double back to it is, in Ireland, the oak woodland is the natural woodland. Beech trees aren't natural here. And for instance, a baby beech tree or seedling or sapling can grow in the understory of an oak woodland, and it can wait until it can just hang out in the understory, live with enough light and wait, and it can pop through the canopy when the others have died. But an oak sapling cannot live in a beech woodland, so it will not survive. So ultimately, these invasive non-native woodlands, like the beech woodland, would end up overtaking, dominating, killing off the natural woodlands that are here.
The oak is what we want, really, in Ireland.
Oak is, the beech isn't
450 different species of
exactly.
insects. This creates the more complexity.
Well, oak almost seems like it seems like the anchor tenant of an Irish and an English woodland. It seems like oak is the king or queen or whatever it is. It seems like it's the keystone woodland species.
Yeah, and the herbivore pressures is very interesting, and it needs a lot of kind of
gentle and compassionate conversations.
Exactly. And I was talking about the €1 million it's going to cost for us to fence that one site alone. But you're
going to do it?
Well, okay, €1 million for fencing. I just was cruising the internet the other day. If you want to buy a wolf from Eastern Europe, they're €5,000.
And that just a wolf will just patrol the site.
Well, it will also do lots of other things. And there's a lot of other maintenance and care.
If there's two wolves, it'll breed more.
I'm not even suggesting that, but I'm just from a financial point of view, like Jesus, $1 million versus 5,000. But like I don't even support that happening. I'm just kind of like using an example as
and what are the pros and cons of that? Like because. Obviously, you hear this example of Yellowstone National Park, and you hear it quite regularly. And
now,
I don't know
we don't have the ecosystems to support a herbivore, a predator of that ilk at all.
Because we don't have enough woods.
We don't have enough woods. We don't have enough connection to that complexity right now. We're really long way, if ever, from being there. But what we can do is look at successful reintroduction places around the world, around Europe, and see, what steps they took.
Belgium, they've just reintroduced in the last while.
It's really not my area, the wolf. I kind
really interesting.
People love it because it's just sensational, but it's not where
I wouldn't
my
even
work
say it's
is now.
sensational. I'd just say it's really like every little, you talk to kids about animals and they light up, and we're all ultimately just older kids.
It's a hero. It's a kind of, it's a big character that we're talking about.
It's a big feature in Irish
mythology.
It's a big feature.
Exactly, yeah. And so people do love it.
I think it is, yeah. Wow, what fun. That's amazing.
It's a really interesting place to work, and I'm really grateful for that. And, we have this, we're really well positioned in that conversation because we do work with a lot of landowners, and we work with a lot of people that have been doing this for a long time, a lot of close to nature farmers or, close to nature people that have been connected to woodlands for a long time. So I know a lot of people from, we had a guy working with us for the last few months, and he'd just come from Germany, living up at one of the oak trees to stop it being cut down. But every day we work with our neighbor farming community. So we really have this really rich kind of pool of people to learn from.
And both sides of the story.
Yeah.
It really is good. Like, the way you talk about purpose, like it really is like you're working for nature. Like it literally is working for nature.
Yeah, I definitely take my work serious. Yeah. And everybody does. The team they're crazy. Like how much they do if they worked in the corporate world, they'd be making serious money. These people are really good at what they do.
And how does that work as a charity? Like, because you want to pay people what they're worth.
Yeah.
Yet, if they're worth in the corporate jobs, they can probably earn a lot more.
Yeah,
you're based out in the west of Ireland,
so pay for purpose.
Yeah,
yeah. Like this
it is a form of currency, purpose, and meaning, and connection for sure. And quality of work that people do, and going back to kind of the start of the conversation, I've been very lucky, to even choose these mad jobs that I've chosen over in my years, and I know it's the same for a lot of the Hometree staff, at least the first three, myself, Mitch, and Ray. We'd all been pretty lucky in how we kind of ended up where we lived with the partners that we found. Like I had some money from sailing. Ray had worked in Fantastic for many years. He'd already set himself up. He owned his house, and so did Mitch. So we were coming at it from this like, we're already good. We don't need this place to
you
to
can
make
entertain
us good.
idealisms,
Yeah, so it's just like we were lucky enough to have these things as well. So yeah, it's the system isn't built to allow everybody
the privilege.
It's crazy.
Okay, we got to take a segue into, so we talked about the trees. We've got to talk about Matt and Matt's adventures. As I said, you're extraordinary elemental with multiple chapters in your life. There's Matt the surfer, there's Matt the sailor, there's Matt the farmer, and now there's Matt working for nature. And obviously all of them you're working with nature, but certainly the sailor, like you sailed around
and before even you sailed around the world, was it sailing before surfing?
So I think it was
surfing first.
Yeah, so you grew up in Cornwall, which is down in this beautiful romantic part of England, in a small fishing community, I believe you said, and that I guess there was a huge connection to the sea, and that was what drew you out to surf. And there probably wasn't a surfing culture growing up, or was there?
There was, like, surfing's been in Europe. I mean, the first European surf contest was in Lahinch in the 80s or 60s. And I'm not really
first European surf
contest. It was amazing.
In Ireland?
In Ireland, it was, who'd have thought? So,
surf hotspot, wow.
Exactly. But where I was from, there was for sure a surf community, but there wasn't many of us, in my school of about 500 people, there was probably 6 of us. As kind of rolling.
So it wasn't the cool kids, it wasn't the cool California kids.
I mean, it was, but it wasn't. But that we would have been the minority for sure. Especially people.
Were you admired or revered or just seen as slightly?
Like oddities? We thought we were admired, and other people thought we were.
That's
just
what's
idiots.
most important.
Yeah. And we were having fun, and I was born really close to the sea. My dad, he was from Liverpool, merchant seaman, left home real early, so he had a real adventurous spirit. He couldn't swim. I don't know if he can. He kind of tells me that he can, but I don't think. I've never seen it. So, but he learned to swim when he was like 60 or something. So he couldn't swim. My mum was from a really small kind of Cornish fishing town. Cornwall's a kind of Celtic country. Now they teach Gaelic in schools again. We had hurling, football. My town was named St. Eyre after an Irish saint. The patron saint of Cornwall was St. Pear, also an Irish saint came across from Cork to Cornwall. So having this real strong connection to Ireland anyway, ancestrally. And so my mum and dad, my mum kind of, as I was growing up, she studied politics and sociology, went back to school and educated herself, and she taught that for many years. So that was kind of part of my day-to-day growing up, was mum coming home and really kind of questioning the world. And absolutely a socialist, she really is for people, and so it's always instilled this idea of like, know my privilege within me. And I left school quite early when I was 16, traveling through surfing school system, although I was one of the winners of it because I was extroverted, knew people, athletic. So I was a kind of winner of school, but it bored the head out of me. I didn't get much kind of academically from it. So went from school, surfed a lot. Really
don't be like a pro surfer.
I didn't necessarily want to be a pro surfer. I just wanted to get out of there. We also had a little bed, like everyone in the poor counties is hustling for work, for money. So we had a B&B. Our house turned into a B&B each summer, and we'd get a lot of travelers through. And my dad had, he spent his 15th. I think he got into a merchant ship, stealing someone's passport, and said that he was that person. And he traveled. So that was just instilled in me, this kind of adventurous spirit. And then my mum kind of questioning the world at the same time was just this like deadly combination. And then the sister that was just really supportive and there for me whenever I fell. So I really had that. Surf from a really young age, could swim real early. My dad's restaurant was right on the beach. So he was a great chef.
Wow.
So I could see the ocean from where he worked. He could see me clearly in the sea when he was cooking.
Pretty
it was
cool.
Pretty,
That's a nice
really
kitchen.
Good wave, man. I saw you nail that one.
And he really proud of me, connecting to the sea. I could see that he was like, there was something that was, the fire was lit in him from watching me in the sea. And surfed a long time. And it was my first trip was, I was 16, went to Mexico for the winter, came back.
For the winter, cool.
Yeah.
So for a good few months.
Yeah, I was there 6 months. I spent £300.
And just surfed.
I was 16, like I was a kid. I went there on my own.
Jeez, wow, brave.
Yeah, I remember getting there and someone, as I arrived to this camp, this is pre-mobile phones, arrived to this, I had literally a tape player Walkman, and arrived on to this kind of these huts on the beach in Oaxaca. And this American guy was leaving. He was like, "Hey man, here's a bag." And he just gave me this like pillowcase full of pot, home, outside grown pot. And I was like, didn't even really know what the stuff was, but yeah, needless to say, it was a good few months surfing and eating rice and
just literally living in a hut on the beach.
Living in a hut, no electricity, just surfing my brains out. And I wasn't, gifted as surfer by any means, but really enjoyed being close to the sea. And mum would always ship me off. Like leaving school was fine for her, but she was like, would you take these books with you? You know, and she'd give me some good reading to go away with and come back and quiz me. And yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, surfed a lot, became, you know, relatively good at it. And it wasn't until, you know, traveled a few years in Australia and Indonesia. And on one of those trips, I met this guy and he was like, what are you going to do for your life? And I was just like, geez, I'm going to go surfing with my family, travel and this. And he was like, have you not heard of peak oil? Do you remember when peak oil was a thing?
Yeah.
So
back in the
that
90s.
really landed in me in a big way. Peak oil was coming. So I was like, that trip, I got back to England and was like, I'm going to learn to sail, you know, so kind of went down to the sailing place, you know.
And this was from like, almost like, had you been a pro surfer at that point?
No, not yet even. So kind of sailing started being integrated then. And then it was, I think that the year after, my friend came back from Ireland, and he was like, you're not going to believe it. You know, I found the best wave on earth underneath the cliffs of Moher, and people had seen it, but no one had ever surfed it. So this little Cornish bodyboarder and Cornish photographer had found, you know, first surfed this really crazy wave. And so the next year I came out, and by that time there's a few other people surfing it, good local crew and international crew. And it really is one of the best, craziest
What is it called?
waves. It's called Aileen's.
Aileen's.
Yeah, it's right.
That's
off
the name of this wave off the cliffs of Moher.
Yeah, it's
Aileen.
right there. You can see it from the visitor center, and it really is one of the better waves in the world. It's like,
And
on
it's
its
better
day,
meaning it is huge.
it's as good as it get. You know, it's good you know, as a wave can be. It's really thick. It's beautiful to look at. It looks like a really huge, powerful wave. It's not big and crumbly. It's just beautiful, and it's really hard to surf. So my friend found this wave. We were like had a kind of a shoe in really, because we got to learn without pressure of crowds. We could really take our time. I could anyway, and it was actually mad. Like we left that trip, was here for 3 months, and
Here in Ireland.
Yeah. So
To play with Aileen.
kind of 21 or something, left Ireland, and it was in 2007. So it was like really in the height of the Celtic Tiger, right? So everyone just had a rake of money, and I bought a car in England for £300, and I got here and everyone loved it. It was just kind of quite an old car. Insurance was cheap, so I used to drive these old cars, and a guy in town offered me $3,000 for this car that cost me £300. At that point, it was more money than I'd ever had. So I kind of ended up leaving quite a lot of stuff here because I had to get. I was going to the Canary Islands to join a sailing boat, but I had to get there. So I left all my stuff here, and that's how I really found a connection with Ireland. But it was through surfing those waves. I remember going, Jesus, I have access to one of the best waves in the world. Surfing, if you don't know, it's, you know, quite an egotistic sport. You really can get quite local and a kind of you can really protect your spot that you live in. So it's hard to kind of enter a new scene somewhere else in the world. Like you have to wait at the end of a very big pecking order to catch your waves. But we were just like, there was this wave that we were at the top of it. There was no one else. It wasn't even an order. It was just like,
because no one else really knew of it or could surf it.
Yeah. And then
because you had to be a certain level probably to
you
surf
had to be,
this.
you know, really quite an advanced level. But I remember going, I'm not advanced enough to surf these waves really well. So I went traveling a bit more to really like hone my skills. And it was at that point, well, when I left that year, good friend of ours left at the same time. He was here with me. He went to London to do medical trials to make some money to go on his next surf trip. And he got hit by a bus.
To do medical trials.
Yeah,
like,
it was crazy. We were all supposed to go traveling, meet in the Canaries a few months later, but he ended up going to London to do medical trials on a night out. Got hit by a bus, died. But it was real intense for our little community at the time. Tom Greenaway is such a sweet man. But because of that, we all came back for the funeral. And then after the funeral, my mate said, found this other wave. So we came back out and there was this crazy...
This is in Clare.
In Clare again, just a really crazy fast... Another wave called Riley's. My friend Mickey Smith
near the cliffs
found
of Moher
it.
again.
Yeah, it's about 25 minutes from there. He found this other wave, and he was a really beautiful filmmaker. So he was constantly taking pictures of us, shooting videos. And it was at that point where Celtic Tiger surfing was worth a lot of money. There's a huge audience of surfing in Britain and Ireland. It was said there was more money in Britain and Ireland in surfing than there was in Australia, just because the amount of people buying t-shirts. So there was a lot of money kind of sloshing around the place. And because I was like hanging out with my mate, who was a filmmaker, really one of the best, just by osmosis, I kind of started making a living out of it, because someone was like, you're in all the pictures, here's few grand to wear our clothes. And I only really ever made, I think the best year was like 15 grand a year, but that was for quite a lot of years. So this kind of privilege coming back in, I was just lucky to be able to do that, lucky in the right place at the right time. Someone was like, here's
so
pay to do what you
to be a surfer.
and it wasn't ever enough to like, buy a house or build a living, but it was enough for me to like invest in other things in my own life. So I'd do some work, make some money, lifeguard, deliver a boat somewhere, but I also had this other money trickling, like you keep reinvesting in myself. And then, through professional surfing at that same time, when the whole idea of ESG, CSR, giving back to nature was coming in at the same time, I was already growing vegetables by then, and my sponsor just loved it. They were like, this is the best thing ever, we can promote how good one of our ambassadors are at growing veg. And they've really been on the journey with us and have always supported.
That's Finisterre.
Yeah, Finisterre. They always supported Moy Hill and all the work we've done at Hometree. So, in a very light touch way, but at the beginning when, relationships are important, when a few grand here and there makes a huge difference at the start of a startup or something, it's been really helpful. So,
wow. And so the setting, so surfing.
Which wave was better? Just to hear.
Which way?
Riley
For me,
or
Aileen's
Aileen?
is
still one of the best.
Yeah, but
waves.
I surf with my left foot forward rather than my right foot forward. So Aileen's is perfect for me there, and Riley's, you need to, it's the other way around. So,
right foot forward.
Yeah. So
Which is goofy and which is...
so goofy
Riley,
is if you put your right
forward.
foot forward. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Same with snowboarding.
Yeah, exactly. So I love Aileen's, but most people would say Aileen's is better. Yeah, for sure. Bigger, but just more perfect. It's super nuanced. I am not going to break that down now because it would take the rest.
I
of the
love
show.
hearing you talk about it. Even
Yeah.
just talking about it there, it makes me smile and go, "Oh, it's like someone talking about their lover."
And what about sailing? So you qualified to be a sailor and got an anchor tattoo and went sailing around the world.
Basically, yeah. So it was after kind of that peak oil conversation. It really kind of shook me.
And the peak oil conversation was that, I remember it was in the 90s, we read books about peak oil is coming, there's
Richard
going to be no more
Heinberg,
oil.
we had in the
There's no
podcast,
more
he wrote the
fossil
book.
fuels. Fossil fuels are running out, which they still are.
Yeah.
And we're all going to be, left with no oil, so no electricity and no power, and we've got to figure this stuff out. So that was the context of peak oil.
But I suppose it landed in me because of this kind of upbringing I'd had, this kind of close to nature socialist upbringing. So when I heard that, it was like the seedbed was already there, primed, ready for it. So when I got back, I was like, let's go sailing, kind of told a few lies in a few yacht clubs, said that I had a few skills, but I was also had lifeguarded at that time. So I knew my way around trailers and jet skis, and I'd been surfing big waves. So I was just like, I know I can do this. So ended up kind of hitchhiking a few times to the south of France, delivering boats. And then bought a small boat, fancied my chances. Sailing, I actually kind of fixed up this tiny little boat with a friend, and I was about to head off to go to Canary Islands or somewhere, and I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I was like, because if you're coastal sailing all the way to, say, the top of Africa, you can do you can do like 5-hour sail, 5-hour sail, 5-hour sail all the way down. It can take you many months. So I was like, sure, I'm going to take my little boat that I'd done up, and
by little you mean
like 20 foot, like a kind of,
and with like a mast and
with a sailing boat
and somewhere to sleep,
and a small somewhere to sleep, and I kind of, I took it out and I was like, I'm going to start heading down to France, but I was like, I'm not going to tell anyone because I can just pull in on the next port round, which I do.
So not going to tell anyone, like you would think that, like,
I wasn't setting off on this big voyage, so I just didn't have the faith that I was going to. So I'm testing this out, but after the first voyage, round, it was like a 20 mile an hour round land, 20-mile trip around Land's End in Cornwall. So I had some technical difficulties and had to pull into the next harbour. So I was like, okay, I need to get a lot better at what I'm doing. I need to know boats better, not just sailing, because I knew sailing quite good, but not the engineering inside of boats. So I was kind of partying that weekend and met someone in a bar, and they were like, I actually work on a boat. Do you want to help us deliver this boat to the Caribbean from England in the next few months? So I said yes. It was a job. I think I got £80 a day for 3 months work, and I left there with
on a boat,
chunk of money, really beautiful boat, hard work. And I actually vowed never to kind of work on a sailing boat again. They say mixing work and pleasure is a bad thing, and I really felt that too. So I kind of made a vow not to do that. And I did a lot more small boat sailing.
Because it just eroded your love for it.
It eroded the love, and it kind of turned, something. I felt that like my choice was taken away of my days and things like that. So did a lot more hitchhiking. Sailing for free, dropping people's boats off in different places for free, just like loving the spirit of it. Small boat sailing, they call it. And then a few years later, that I was at sea, and that same guy phoned me up. He's like, okay, I need help on a slightly bigger boat. The person that owned the boat's the biggest legend ever. You're going to love him. We're going surfing all over the world. It's going to take 2.5 years.
So sailing and surfing.
Yeah, he was like, the owner is a Californian guy who loves surfing, going to these surf spots. You're going to be paid quite well. You've got to take it. And I was like,
total no-brainer.
But no, at the time I was like, get fucked, I'm not interested in that. And he was like, hear me out. And I was living in an island at the time. And I had a call with him. I said I'd meet him, and then I spent 2.5 years on that boat, and we
literally sailing around the world, surf spots,
and getting paid really. But it was like, I never worked harder. Even after growing veg, even after planting trees, it really is. It's when you work on. It wasn't a super yacht, but it was a professional boat, and it's very hard work. You're nonstop, a lot of pressure. Boat's worth a lot of money. You've got to get somewhere by a time. You're not just cruising. Even sailing on your own boat with a big budget at your own pace is hard work, but doing it on someone else's time, it was a lot.
So you've sailed around the world a few times.
I've done like around the world, but not in kind of non-stop, in different times of my life. But yeah, it was been really.
Jeez, that's
I'm
a good
super
one.
Lucky, yeah.
That's a good one to have under your belt.
It really is. And this trip we did it backwards. So we went kind of against the trade winds. So that's
cool.
Yeah. So that's that's on my bio, sailed around the world backwards. But I still have a real huge love for sailing, and it's kind of always in me. These things that you learn.
A man in the sea. You're a true mariner.
They don't leave you this stuff, the lessons that you learn, and the access to that, the seeing moonrises over the sea and eclipses and dolphins and whales, like that stuff, or just being on watch for 6 hours on your own with these huge sails up, for my mind anyway, it's very settling, having something, both being active and passive at the same time.
How do you find then now?
Can I run to the toilet super quick?
Yeah.
You keep going.
How do you find now living in Clare in one location with a family and not being connected to the sea? And obviously you got a strong sense of purpose. However, it's changed.
I think if I really tapped into it, there'd be a lot of grief there. But I can be in the sea most days. Knowing that I have access to it, knowing that I also have the potential to kind of change my life in any direction, really is almost kind of enough. Having the capacity to move in directions, back to that kind of privilege. That's, I think, the main part of being privileged is having access to resources to change your situation, and that's fundamental.
I love it.
Yeah.
So cool. And how's it being a dad?
I love being a dad. Yeah. Never really talk about it publicly, but they mean more to me than anything. And I was up here last night for the podcast, and usually my son wakes me up and we cuddle for 45 minutes, and I didn't tell him that I was leaving last night, so that's
how old is he now?
Hard. He's 3. Yeah, really find it the greatest trip, but it's also it's tough work.
Oh, like anything, the greatest joy is the greatest challenge.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and the
greatest cost.
The last time I met you, you were saying, you're not trying to be one of these perfect parents. Like you don't let your kids watch TV, and I really, we have been that, and it was only that really conversation really landed to me. Like last week, he was watching a bit of Peppa Pig and giving us a break. So it was sound advice. Thanks for that.
There's no perfect with it.
Yeah,
mine will,
Daddy Pig. I love Daddy Pig.
It's a great character. But even there this morning, I come in and Theo was out looking for us on the beach and trying to find us everywhere, and I walk in and he's playing FIFA 2023, and I'm like, Theo, you're not meant to play PlayStation today. And it's like, okay, you can play one game. Anyway. And then you turn it off, but it's like, I'll hide the remote and we play hide and go seek with it. Well, we try to have a rule that Monday to Thursday there's no TV at all. Nothing.
We're just talking about parenting and kind of the joys of that, and it's been a really cool.
You can't mention the joys without mentioning the challenges.
Yeah, exactly.
It's light and dark and the same.
Yeah, exactly.
And purpose all enshrined.
I was surfing down the beach yesterday with them, and they've both been on the board with me catching waves. And yesterday was the first time that my son was like, he holds onto my neck. I paddle out, I catch a wave, and then I hold him. Like he's wrapped around my arm, wrapped around my neck. He's 3. And then I go and get my daughter, who's 1, and she sits on the front, and we catch a wave together. And like they're connected with the ocean for sure.
Jeez, yeah. Well, how could you not? If like talk about formative moments. You're like, wow, that's what a way to be brought up.
They're sweet.
Jeez. Your latest teachers.
They're 2 of my latest teachers, and what's I don't know the kind of the course of this, but there was a point in my journey when I really wanted to. I thought that, I could change the world, or, the work that we were doing could change the world. And, it was when I was growing vegetables. And at that point I was like, I'm not going to have kids because it's not fair on the planet, this kind of stuff. And, these kind of light bulb moments that happened throughout the years. And I'm really glad that my kind of spirit shifted into being open to being a parent, because it's been one of the most beautiful things. And I suppose to unless you guys have got other questions, but
I had 2 other ones, but they're not really. Like I had, like you don't do carbon credits, which I think is a really interesting thing, because obviously as a charity, there's so many businesses that want to offset their carbon, and it's
almost
a great
sell their
way.
Guilt.
Offset their guilt. Just the cost of an imperfect world and the cost of doing business is that there's a huge amount of carbon put into the atmosphere with a lot of businesses, and businesses that want to have good ESGs or good corporate governance, and they say, or good that they want to be able to say, we are carbon neutral, or we're working towards it, without getting to the root cause of it. But I'd imagine it could be a great way to generate income as a charity. Like it could be a great way to get instantly generate so much revenue.
Imagine that, yeah.
But you say no to it, which is a really an ethical dilemma, I'd imagine.
I think, we say no to it, but can I get there in 1 second? Because I just want to close at a different loop. Yeah. So, after kind of sailing, surfing, traveling, I was sailing for a really long time, and was having a blast. And I'd saved up enough money on this one boat, saved up about 100,000 euros. And I had a spot in a marina in San Francisco. I was going to buy a boat. And that was me. I was like off going sailing around the world. And I had
forever
a visa for America. I was super set. And came back to Ireland on a holiday, and I went surf trip, and I bumped into my friends Fergal and Mitch at the time, and they just started growing like a small patch of veggies out the back of their garden. And I was staying with them at the time, and I was like, fuck, this is the real deal. Like all of this kind of intellectual stuff that I've been learning throughout the years was really starting, like this shit's tangible. So, and Mitch had just snapped his back surfing Aleen's, so he was just like really seeing the benefits of looking after his body through good food. And in a really short amount of time, we went from like growing veg out the back of our garden into setting up a community garden, then to setting up a farm. And then it was 17 acres. We were doing about 50 veg boxes a week. And then we were like, the farm next door came for sale. That was kind of where Moy Hill was born during that time. Then we were doing about 80, 90 veg boxes a week, big boxes of veg, direct to consumer, direct to our community, having a real clear, tangible impact daily on people's lives. And it was such a wicked mission. And Moy Hill Hometree, we were really like connected at that point. Like, how do we add tree systems on farms? The riparian zones, how do we do it skillfully? And it was at that same point, like Moy Hill had just bought the farm next door because it was going to be bought by a big forestry plantation. So we were like, okay, this can't happen. We did a crowdfunder, got quite good at fundraising, and we kind of successfully pulled that up. We leveled up the farm there. And it was the year or two after where I was on my own journey, kind of got to be in 28, 29, 30, thinking about kids, met this real, the love of my life, met my wife. And at that point, through a few other untraditional awakening mechanisms and reading some more literature about kind of climate change, I came across this paper, Deep Adaptation, that a scientist in England had written. He worked for the UN, Jem Bendell. He written this paper called Jem, Jem. It's the same name as my wife, Jem Bendell. He wrote this paper called Deep Adaptation. And he basically took a sabbatical from the UN, and he looked at the most recent research. This was in 2018. So he looked at the most recent research, and he was like, that based on what everybody is saying, this is peer reviewed, climate change has gone non-linear, and there's nothing that we're going to do on this current trajectory, even if we stopped everything right now, all of the regen farming, all of the no-dig vegetable beds, all of the tree planting, there's nothing we're going to do to stop 1.5 degrees. So he's like, if that's the case, then surely there's a time that we go, let's stop trying to change it and then start adapting to it. So this idea of deep adaptation is like, first we have to absolutely honor where we're at. If we cannot honor where we're at, we cannot build the right path forward. And if we're not honoring where we're at by saying it's not happening, so now climate change, his thing is that climate change people, they're actually now adaptation deniers. He doesn't use that language, I just came up with that. But if we're not saying, holy fuck, where we're at, what are we going to do about it? We're just kind of going down. We keep going the wrong way. So he basically brought all this research together and said, you know, what's the plan out of this? And first is really understanding the situation, grieving the shit that's going to go down. And if we cannot change it, if we're going to get to 1.5 degrees, the world is going to change considerably socially. If we're going to see like ecosystems completely being destroyed, you know, not being able to regenerate, like we've seen in the middle of the earth, this arid desert, and we're going to, you know, see the social systems in those areas break down rapidly. We're going to see world wars, we're going to see pandemics, we're going to see shortages of fuel and food. And he wrote this in 2018, and we all know what's happened.
What was his name again?
Jem, Jem Bendell. Bendall. He wrote this paper, and it was like, you know, it takes about an hour and a half to read. It's a fucking killer of a paper. And that woke the hell out of me. But he also offers this really beautiful framework for understanding what he shares. And it's called the 4R framework. So you start to really look at the things in your life and the things in your community that you could kind of change. So he looks at, you know, reconciliation, restoration, and for us, kind of on the spot, I'm in the heat, so I can't remember them, but he offers this real framework for like letting go of the things that you don't need in your life. But it was that paper that really shook me, alongside of me, my partner, and some other kind of healing things that I was doing, you know, personal work that I was doing at the time. It was like, I can't keep doing this kind of
surfing and sailing.
No, I can't keep doing this, like farming the way that I was. I can't keep living in the way that I was, which was like, let's change the world. And if the world has already changed, then what do I want to do with the rest of my life, with my time? And I really think that that was a pivotal point for me, is to go, okay, take a breath, change, you know, where I was working, who I was working with. And that's, I really think that Hometree 2.0 was really born out of that place. And subsequently, it's had a massive impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's funny how you thought you were going, oh, well, like, you know, there was active change with Moy Hill, with as in giving, you know, vegetable boxes, local, organic veg to local people. And then you started Hometree with the idea that it was, you know, it wasn't going to maybe be as much active change. And here it is. It's just as active in a different way.
And, you know, we really were having a really crazy impact. But it was that point in my life that really kind of changed things. It was that point that I decided I want to have kids too. So it's just so interesting. But I really highly recommend that paper. You know, I wanted to say at the start, like, if there's things that you interested in after this show, I really would.
Is he still alive? Must see if we can.
He is. And so weirdly, I read this paper. It shook the hell out of me. I was like, how do I keep living the way that I'm living? I want to change it. And I went to this camp in England. They're called The Dance is a Universal Peace. They're kind of Sufi dance, but with all faith. And so it's a family festival, no drink, no drugs, no phones for 7 days. And it's about dancing, music, singing, dancing, but you do the Sufi dances. So there's a band in the middle and you all kind of...
Like, is that the whirling dervish? Is that different? No.
I'm not sure. Yeah. But you know, there's kind of beautiful singing in the middle, and you do a kind of meditative dance around the outside, you know, groups of people. And it's a transformative experience. But even just no drink, no drugs, no phones at a festival with your family is transformative enough. But then they do this spiritual dance. And I was at this camp thinking, thank God, I'm just going to get away from everything. I'm going to switch off, do some nice dancing, do some more singing, and have a great time. And a simple twist of fate, Jem Bendell, this UN scientist, started going out with this woman who was a mad hippie. And she was like, come on, let's go to this dancing festival that I know. She took him there. Another twist of fate, someone on the gate, the kind of ticket in space, it's a small festival, so everybody does everything, was like, oh, I recognize this name. And they were in kind of XR, Extinction Rebellion. They were like, I recognize this name. You're that guy. And he was like, I am. And that was the end of that. But later on, she said to someone else, and all of a sudden, the idea of deep adaptation, this really confronting idea, like rippled through the camp. You know, everyone was like completely shook, like, because it basically says that the world we cannot change what's going to happen. There's going to be societal unrest and potentially, you know, ecosystem destruction, potentially extinction. And what in our lifetimes, in the short term, in our lifetimes, in 10 to 30 years, you know, climate change is drastically changed where we're at.
10 to 30 years in our
lifetime. Isn't it already happening?
Yeah, well, you see, we've
like
had the
what was
wettest.
the pandemic? Like
Well,
what was,
even if you look at it now, like it's August now, so we had the hottest June we've ever had, the wettest July we've ever had, and August, who knows what's coming.
And you know, the years previously, you know, we've had a war, we've had a pandemic, we've had fuel and food shortages. Like that is already society. Like if that's not collapsed, what is? It hasn't completely collapsed. You know, we're not running around like stealing food off each other, or are we? You know how the system functions. So anyway, that message ripped through camp, and so they were like, "Fuck, we can't just let this happen." So he ended up putting on workshops at that camp.
Wow!
Yeah. So it was really profound, and I ended up spending more time with him. You know, just like, and you know, did some courses with the University of Cumbria and Iski. We did some courses together. I think she's been on the show.
Yeah,
before.
I saw you hosted.
Yeah. So we done, and so that was really kind of pivotal for me anyway, and. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
It was
wow.
It was.
You opened up another Pandora's box there.
Opened up
a box there. Say, right, 10 to 30 years, it's all good. The game is going to change fundamentally. So get ready. Deep adaptation.
Yeah. And I really find it really powerful, and it's not to kind of unsettle anyone. It's more to go like, what's important in your life? What do you want to keep doing? What do you want to let go of? What do you want to restore? What do you want to reconcile? Like it's straightforward stuff, but it just offers us a framework to do some of that work.
Wow.
But you're asking about carbon credits. Like,
I think in the context of what you just said, like carbon credits, I'm less interested now. But sure, let's talk about carbon.
I think, you know, the problem with carbon credits, at least in Ireland, in this moment, there isn't a kind of state regularized way of doing it. The state haven't told us exactly how they'll regulate the production of carbon in peat lands or woodlands. So if we were to sell them, we would have to kind of be chancing it until the state tell us exactly how they're going to do it. And we'd have to use a model from another European country, probably Britain, the Woodland Carbon Code. So we would then be like ultimately selling these credits that the state haven't told us how they would value them. And it's also a really volatile market. It's because of the simplicity of it, it's not complex enough to really honor their purpose for even existing in the first place. I mean, it's been a great journey for people to go on that carbon credit journey, but I believe that the kind of carbon credits are like the mini disc of audio. They're nearly done.
Well, it's interesting on Ryanair, you're buying a flight and it says pay $250 to offset your carbon or something like that. And you're kind of going, wow, this has gone commercial.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you listen to all of the advertising, you'd be like, Jesus, my car, my fuel, my flights, they're all, you know, carbon positive. So the world's in great shape. But, you know, the reason that we haven't sold them is because we haven't found a really robust way of using them to kind of pay for the work that we do. And ultimately, what carbon credits are trying to address is how do we create something and monitor it in a way that we can put a metric around it that people can fund. That's all that they're really talking about. Monitoring, metric, and then selling it, fundraise it. And carbon credits isn't the mechanism for that, but it's been a great way for people that aren't in the world that I'm in to go, what's my impact? You know, what impact am I having, and how do I kind of turn that down to live in a more kind of sustainable way? So I think that it has been helpful to use that. Like mini discs were really helpful. I loved my mini disc player. I had 4 rap albums on one disc. It was epic, you know. But ultimately it was short lived. The iPod came along real quick and
kaboom. And I see there's something else coming.
There's something, you know. So what I know is coming. It's being trialed in different parts of the world. Is a biodiversity credit, which is which is really what the carbon credit was set out to do. Is like, how do we actually like pay back for the bad that we've done? So it's not just about this kind of
carbon. No one knows what it is. Like it's ethereal idea.
What's carbon?
Where do I get carbon?
Like, who knows what carbon? Like, does anyone ever touched it? Like, obviously, it's around us all the time, but it's like it's so conceptual, and it belongs, like the theory of it belongs in the heads of a few, and then we're going like, I've offset my carbon. But like, if we're talking about biodiversity, we can all go like, oh yeah, I gave whatever amount of money to protect that much nature, that much biodiversity. I paid money to
I think even
biodiversity.
nature credit is a better one, because biodiversity, like you don't really get, like it's quite a big word, like biodiversity. Like I think lots of people do understand it, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand it.
Like
as well.
we had, in the last 2 years of Hometree, in our kind of growth, we've had 2 massive businesses asked. One wanted to give us 18 million and one wanted to give us 13 million to sell them carbon credits. And we said, but no, both times.
Wow.
Like,
that's a lot of money.
It's a huge amount
of money. That's a lot of land you could have bought.
Was that tough to turn that down?
Of course it was.
Like it took a bit. It took a bit of debating. Yeah, it's it's one of those things that you're really grateful for the board and a real great team to kind of flesh it out. One of the things that it doesn't address for us, like the carbon thing. So we priced a carbon credit for what we would need to sell the carbon created in our projects to do our projects well. So generally, like the carbon credit on the open market, you pay about $20 a ton. That's the competitive global price of a ton of carbon. For us to do it well in Ireland using these seeds that we collect, that we propagate in an organic nursery, that we go out and we plant on land that's next to a farming community, and we support those communities that we're impacting in a really like wholesome way, is going to be 150 a ton. So we're 7 times the price of the current one, and it's like, who wants to pay for that? It's a real niche product, so based on that, we didn't want to strip things out to become competitive, and that's suppose like where we're at. Even though we've had offers before to get close to that, but really what we're looking at now is like, what's the right metric to use? Like, how, what's the right monitoring process that feels, authentic and genuine in this context for the people that will actually be supporting our work? And is it as complicated as this kind of blanket metric program that another NGO have come up with to kind of authenticate all of these different projects worldwide? So we're trying to kind of like stick with the problem long enough for the right solution to kind of arise.
Clever.
But it is, to do it well, there's no getting out of the fact that it's going to be expensive in this context. Like to buy that from this country with the price of land, with the amount of people that you're going to affect, is going to be expensive.
Well, to approach anything in a holistic manner is typically more expensive than
industrial.
Yeah,
processes.
holistic, and also like the nature of this island is that we're always kind of the land is always kind of close to a agricultural or urban area, so you're going to affect a lot of people. And when you start affecting people, you need to go and say, like, how can we do this thing near you that's going to affect you in a way that feels like a big yes from you? Like, we want big yeses. All we want is big yeses. Like it will only succeed through a series of big yeses.
Yeah, it's a good guiding principle.
Yeah.
Matt,
Right, well, I think we got to land this plane now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. You're wonderful.
We're all kind of slumping a bit, myself included.
So Hometree. So how can people get involved with Hometree?
From a place of big yes, like that time that you phoned up and you were like, the kind of the positive feeling that you brought was amazing. We do loads of different things. From kind of team building, ESG days to. It's actually interesting. There's a big scenic parcel of land for sale in Ireland at the moment. It's going to cost about 10 million. Ultimately, at some point, we're looking for like a really big donation. Funding mechanism, big donation. But we only got here through a series of small ones. And, there isn't I could say just click on the donate button, but that isn't the only way that you can do it. We hold loads of open days, loads of events. We do 2 free open days a month where there's food provided, really, really hands-on experience. I think if you go online, have a look at our profile or come to one of our sites and go, oh, this resonates with me, and then kind of reach out and see if you can support our work in that way.
Brilliant.
Or buy a bag of trees and plant some saplings on your land.
You sell trees.
Often, like after the season, and we know how many we needed for our sites, there's always tens of thousands left that people buy as saplings. But again, to do it well, it's more expensive. So
how many trees do you grow a year? There's 10,000
couple
left.
100,000.
Wow.
Yeah, probably with the ambition to do about 1 million in the next 2 years. So
On the lads.
Yeah,
amazing. And then you've self-published a book.
We have a book or a kind of series of books coming out. The one that I was showing you this morning is called Under Summer Pastures, Explorations and Essays from Ireland's Temperate Rainforest, which is what I was going back to earlier, like these really unique ecosystems there's probably about 4 or 5 places in the world that there's that much rainfall to kind of create this wet, dank, dark woodland where there's kind of mosses and ferns growing on every, like if you go to a woodland in the east, it's like there's the forest floor, there's the herb layer, and then there's the canopy. But in these rainforests, it's like mosses growing the whole way up the tree trunk. And then there's even mosses growing along the branches. And on top of the mosses, there's other plants, ferns. You've seen them, right?
Yeah.
They're a really different ecosystem to the kind of drier woodlands of the east. So that's really our kind of main focus.
When you say the word rainforest, it sounds so much more powerful than woodland. Like it sounds like draws you in more.
Yeah.
So like I wonder part of the rebranding.
But then you're a bit dank, dark.
We're supporting rainforest. We're supporting rainforest production.
Well, like
on the
that's
west coast of
our
Ireland.
kind of, up until a year and a half ago, like we were working in the rainforest area, but we weren't calling it that. So this site that we bought in Galway, it's the start of a rainforest project. 4,000 acre project, which will be about 5 years. And, we need a good chunk of money to fund that really well. But that's what it's looking at, this really unique habitat. So.
Well, because it's even, you think about it, like woodland is a word like woodland.
Yeah.
Rainforest is like a forest with loads of rain. Like,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
somehow our associations to the word rainforest is, oh my God, it's like
The diversity, well, it's just teaming with more
Exactly.
diverse-
I mean,
Life,
and
brimming with
temperate,
life.
so it's a cold rainforest, but there's so much rainfall over there, and these ecosystems, they're so unique. There's only Chile, some parts of North America, and then this coast, so Scotland, Ireland, Cornwall. That's more or less, and some in New Zealand as well. That's where these places exist. Nowhere else. So they're really worth supporting. And the Wild Atlantic Way, this kind of road across the west coast of Ireland, all the way around, perhaps. Or maybe it's just the west coast. They've kind of branded it so well that we're the Wild Atlantic Rainforest Project. So.
wow.
Love it.
But I love the idea, the vision of like it seems like something in a movie, that green, mossy, just like emeralds with a deer in the middle of it,
Being chased by a wolf.
I can see those images. Don't mention the wolf. That's,
Okay,
that's
You're gonna get me to
that's
say it
political,
somehow.
like,
No,
that's
no.
absolutely political.
Anyway, Matt,
Yeah.
you're wonderful. Thank you so much for coming down.
Thanks, man.
and I love your work.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks, man.